Welcome back, Rosebuds! Today we're reading some creepy cryptid encounters. If you're new here, welcome! The group of stories you'll hear today are all true except for one made-up fictional imposter story. Have fun guessing which are allegedly true and which one is complete fiction. We have 5 truly terrifying tales today. Make sure to listen all the way to the end, where I will reveal which one is the imposter story. So sit back, dim the lights, and settle in for 5 creepy cryptid tales to tell in the dark. Story number 1, Crawler Sighting. This took place at some point between 12 a.m. and 1:30 last night NZST time. For context, I'm a programmer and do most of my work on commission for US clients, so my lifestyle is very nocturnal. Finishing at around 12 a.m., I decided to go for a walk to get my head out of work mode so I could wind down and get some sleep. It's midsummer here, and I would often take walks as the weather was pleasant and there was a decent amount of moonlight on that night. After walking for about 15 minutes, I reached the furthest street from my house. I live in a very small rural town. This street runs along a large embankment, which is next to a biking track and a bit of forest that separates it from the river. As I got there, I turned right to take the bike track back into town. This is when I saw the crawler. My first thought was it was a horse, because it was standing on all 4s in the middle of a paddock, and there are plenty of horse owners around this area. I quickly realized that it wasn't. There was a small herd of sheep huddled in the corner of the paddock that gave me a sense of scale. It was easily 2 meters at the shoulder. A sense of fear and dread came over me as I quickly crouched down and tried to hide in a patch of tussock near the footpath, but it had already seen or heard me. It took a few alarmingly quick steps toward me. I was terrified. I thought it might charge at me for a second, but just as quickly, it stopped and sat there, staring. It was a dull pink color, like overboiled meat, and it had sunken dark pits for eyes. At first I thought it had no mouth, but it seemed to have an overly large mouth and a lack of lips, making it appear mouthless. Rather than being emaciated or bony, it was weirdly smooth. I couldn't see any outline of its ribs or spine. After what seemed an eternity, it simply turned and sped off towards the river without making a sound. It was at this point I noticed that sound had returned. I'd not noticed how quiet it had been until it suddenly wasn't anymore. I don't just mean the animals and insects. Even the sounds of the river were basically inaudible. Maybe shock, but I don't recall even hearing my own breathing. Not sure how long I crouched there. After the shock wore off, I got up and walked home as fast as I could, but I backtracked instead of walking along the river road like I usually would. I'm pretty sure I saw it again out of the corner of my eye as I was turning the corner onto my street, which is horrifying to think it was tracking me. Perhaps it was just my imagination, though. However, the first sighting was not just a trick of the mind. Story number 2, Hunting My Chickens. On a normal day in the late winter a few years back, something terrifying happened to me. I was done with the day and I had crashed into bed earlier than usual. Then later that night at around midnight, I woke up. I was thirsty and my mouth was dry. I got up to get a drink. I randomly and suddenly realized I might have forgotten to close the chicken coop door before coming in, so I checked the window after getting a drink. My blood froze as I saw a strange creature loping through my backyard. My heart sank and I couldn't move. The creature was tall, bony, and had scaly skin. Its eyes were yellow, and the moonlight seemed to gleam off of them. Its mouth hung open, and I could see it had fangs and a long tongue. It was hunched over, but walking on its hind legs. It stopped in the middle of the yard and seemed to be looking at my chicken coop, which I had remembered to close the door, thankfully. After a minute or two, it suddenly leapt over my 6-foot-tall fence in one bound from about 5 yards away. Since then, I never go out in my yard after dark, and I recently purchased a shotgun, although I don't know if that would just hurt it or anger it. Story number 3. It found me again. A while ago, I saw something and posted about it. It really shook me up. A little bit more info. I got a Glock because the first time seeing this, it scared me so bad I wanted protection. I didn't think I'd see it again, but I did. So me and a buddy were on our way home from a party. It was pretty late, maybe 3 a.m. We went the same direction as before because it's the most normal and direct route. Anyway, we were just driving and joking around like any other day. We got to a certain point and there was heavy fog, much like before when I saw this thing for the first time. I slowed down a bit. We drove normally, but with much less conversation because the fog was unnerving. We're coming up on turns in the road again. My buddy, who I'll call Seth, mentioned how the turns are kind of scary. Then I mentioned the story about my previous encounter. He laughed at me because he'd never believed me in the first place. But I'll tell you, after his own experience, he was very serious then. We went up an incredibly steep hill that just kept going up and up these switchbacks. The entire time it takes to get through the switchbacks is about 20 minutes. After that, we stopped moving and the road flattened out. After going straight for a little bit, there was another very tight turn. I felt the hair stand up all over my body. It was that something's not right feeling. So I drew the Glock from where I kept it. I don't think Seth knew why, but he drew his as well. He was about to ask me something, but as we round the corner and slow down, that thing is there again, in the road, crouched down, same as before. Seth says something, but I was too scared to remember what. I stopped the car. We're further back than I was the first time. This thing is just barely visible at the edge of the fog. I lean out my window and level my gun. Seth does the same. I wait for something to happen. I don't know what I was waiting for. We sat like that for maybe 30 seconds. It seemed like minutes. Then Seth says, "What the hell are we doing, bro? Let's get the fuck out of here." He keeps his gun outside the car and leveled at the crouched thing in the middle of the road. I put the car in reverse, and as soon as I did, that thing stands up. It didn't do it the same way as before. It was instant this time, and it was strange because it was crouched and then not. But I don't remember it standing because it was like a video skipping frames. I pressed the gas and slowly moved backwards, and then it disappeared into the fog. Seth relaxed a bit and pulled his gun inside. He was really shaken. I back up more and keep on going. When we finally arrived home, I turned to Seth and asked, "Do you believe me now?" Story number 4. Birdman. Between the age of 10 and 22, I grew up in a town that was too populated to be considered a county, but too deep in the woods to be a suburb. It was a little town called Monroe. If you've seen Twin Peaks, the show, you'll know what it's like. Small town with a disturbing undercurrent of drugs, people being murdered. The first episode of Forensic Files actually takes place there. Exorcisms at an excommunicated church, a lady in white. Oh, and the Warrens, who need no introduction if you know anything about paranormal investigators. Around 2002, I was driving home from my friend's house a little after midnight and cut through a densely wooded part of town. As I made a turn on the right side of the road, there was a large white figure that seemed to be hunched over or perched on a tree stump. If it was a man, it would have been a very tall person, because in the 4 seconds I saw it reflected in my headlights, it was almost 6 feet. That's with the forward posture. I want to say it had a bird-like face, but because I was going at speed and not expecting it, sometimes your brain fills in details. There was a shrill sense of panic when I saw it, pure flight or fight, and I gunned it all the way home. I told my friend about it the next day, nervously laughing it off, saying, I definitely saw something, but it could have been an egret, or the world's largest barn owl, or some other bird. Maybe my brain just filled in too many details, except less than a week later, I saw it again in my rearview mirror when driving about a mile or two from the first sighting. This time, it was during the day. Again, more bird-like than a person, but person-sized. Mostly white. Its face was largely featureless. No eyes, no mouth, but that odd nose that owls have before their beak. I broke out into a cold sweat and gunned it home again. I haven't seen it since, but those memories really shook me hard for a while. Story number 5, Jersey Devil. Now, my mom saw this, but I'm gonna tell her story in full confidence that she's not lying or exaggerating. She's a pretty close-minded kind of person when it comes to stuff like aliens and mythical creatures. She thinks Earth is the only place that life exists in the infinite universe, and that Bigfoot is just an inbred mountain man. So the year was 1971. My mom was in the car with her parents and brother. They were driving home from a camping trip through the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. The highway was very dark, but the moon was fairly bright, and there was thick woods on either side of the highway. The radio station they were listening to slowly became static. Then something flew over the top of their car at an insane speed. It passed over the car, traveling in the same direction as them, and was out of sight before they even realized what happened. The station started to come back as soon as it was gone. She claims its wingspan covered the entire road, and you could distinctly hear massive wings flapping against the roof of the car over the sound of the radio fuzzing and the noise of the open windows. It was so disturbing that my grandpa immediately pulled over, and everyone looked around for what could have caused it, but there was nothing in sight. Not even the faintest noise of wings flapping or trees rustling. Whatever it was large, enough to fully block the moonlight and cover the entire car in a shadow. Mind you, this was a very large sedan. She believes it was likely the Jersey Devil, and if my God-fearing, alien-disbelieving, Bigfoot-debunking mother thinks she saw the goddamn Jersey Devil, then by God, I believe her. Well, Rosebuds, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Before I do the reveal for our creative fictional story, don't forget to give us a quick thumbs up and subscribe. It really does help us out, and we truly appreciate your continued support. And if you did enjoy today's episode, share it with your friends. Sharing is caring. Also, let us know in the comments below what local cryptids you have roaming around in your part of the world. We'd love to hear about it. Alright, on to our reveal. Today's imposter story is story number 3, It Found Me Again, about the 2 men on the switchbacks encountering a ghastly creature in the fog. I hope you enjoyed all our stories today. Anyway, that's a wrap, Rosebuds. Thanks for listening. Until next time, take care and stay creepy.